So let me walk you through the Audit Manager service. Given the time constraint, it'll probably be an overview. So I would highly encourage you to utilize the free tier, which allows you to test the service for free for 2 months and do a deep dive yourself. But here we go. Let's dive in. So let's say you come to your AWS console and open up AWS Audit Manager. You will start from the service landing page if you have not already set up Audit Manager in that region. So for example, I'm not set up with Audit Manager in that region, and the service will walk me through a setup process. It's a fairly simple click-through process. Typically, an IT person from your organization who manages your AWS account will do it. And the reason is that they will need to set up permissions using the IAM service for the folks that you want to provide access to Audit Manager, the people that you want to be using Audit Manager service. There's also an option to set up your own encryption keys or use an AWS provided KMS key. So these are the settings that are required to be done. If the customer wants to use AWS organizations, then they will want to set up a delegated admin account. That's something that can be done here, as well as connection with AWS Config or Security Hub services. This is optional, but this allows customers to bring in data from compliance practices that are happening on the security side of their organization and connect it up with their audit reporting. So it's a simple click-through process. It'll complete the setup, and then you get going with Audit Manager. Let me show you what things look like if you're already set up and if you have Audit Manager launched in that region. So let me go to a region where I actually have that done and reland on Audit Manager. So now I'm in North Virginia data center, and I have Audit Manager running in this region. I arrive at the dashboard page. The dashboard page gives you a very quick, at-a-glance overview of what's happening in your Audit Manager account. You start with a daily snapshot, which tells you what's going on. How many controls have evidence that has been flagged as being non-compliant? How many active assessments am I running? So you can look at that overview. You will see the top control domains where issues have been flagged. What's a control domain? A control domain is a technical area, a broad technical area pertaining to the data points which are being collected. So for example, identity and access management is a whole technical area. There can be multiple controls in it across multiple assessments and such. This helps customers quickly see where there are most issues and engage the right technical teams to work on remediation or analysis of those issues. If you look at the control domain and click a little further, you see that the top controls that are experiencing any flags are being shown. Again, this allows you to get at a glance view of where you might want to focus your energy as you look into what's happening in your Audit Manager account. Now, if you would like to dive a little deeper, you can look at specific assessments that you're running and look at this data in context of that assessment. That is useful if there is a person who's focused on a specific compliance type. So let's say there's a person who's managing audits for SOC 2 or who's managing the audit process for PCI, and they're really only interested in doing a deep dive on that specific assessment. They can use this dashboard to look at exactly what is getting flagged within their assessment, and they can download that data to be shared with the rest of the org or other partners that they're working with in their organization. So it's a CSV download that they can do, and they can take that outside in other forums where they might need to interact with their partners. So that's the dashboard. It gives you a quick overview. Now, before we get started further, let's talk a little bit about what is an assessment. So to look at these 6 assessments that we saw are running in this account, let's go to the assessments page. Now, these are the assessments which are created. An assessment is a process that you kick off that goes and collects data continuously. It is taking all of the resource configuration snapshots and the usage activity data that is being collected from sources and collecting them into evidence folders. We will look through that shortly. So it's a process that runs continuously that goes and collects evidence for you against a specific compliance type. So let's dive into what these terms mean a little more specifically. Let's say I want to create an assessment. This is me really kicking off the use of Audit Manager. You can provide some data. You can say, where would you like to store your reports? I'll select one of my S3 buckets where I would like my reports to go. And then you get to select a compliance type that you want to use. Audit Manager comes with standard frameworks, as I had mentioned earlier. So you can use one of the standard frameworks to kick off your assessment. And then the data will be collected against what AWS recommends in order to meet the requirement of those frameworks. You can also create your own custom frameworks or customized frameworks, and we will look through that as well in course of this demo. But let's say for today's purpose, let's select SOC 2 for fun. You can set up tags if you would like to track controls, if you would like to track frameworks as either being assigned to a particular department or a particular quarter or a year, or being more test or data collection oriented versus more ready for auditors. So there are options for you to be able to manage your frameworks as well as controls using tags. The next step in kicking off an assessment is selecting the accounts in which you want to run this assessment. So let me go ahead and select a couple of accounts in which I would like to collect this data. Since I'm using a standard framework, I don't have to select the services in scope. Since Audit Manager already knows for our pre-built frameworks what should be the services in scope. But if I was doing a custom framework, over here I would get the choice to select services in scope. For example, a customer may want to use Audit Manager to monitor activity and collect compliance data only for S3 buckets, and they want to be able to see what the usage of their S3 buckets is, who is accessing it, and be able to have that ready at hand for internal governance purposes. In those kind of situations, they could potentially limit the services that they select to be in scope accordingly. But since we all have defaults here, we will move forward to the next step. The next step is selecting the audit owners that you want to give control over this particular assessment. Audit Manager has two roles. An audit owner can update, modify, create, and is the owner of the audit. There's also a role called resource owner. They are really more the IT people you might be working with who are looking at a particular area or a domain, and you're asking them to review or provide comments on the way your evidence collection process is set up. So there is an option in Audit Manager to delegate controls and get review and provide comments or provide action plans. And there can be discussion and collaboration within teams using Audit Manager as a communication tool. So in this case, I will just go ahead and give a couple of people audit owner rights here. And we will move on to the next step. So that's about it. You have all of the parameters set to create this assessment. Once you create the assessment, Audit Manager will kick off the process of collecting the data. The data will start showing up 24 hours later. And you will just see that come in automatically every day. Now let me show you what an assessment will look like. We're not going to look at this one since we just created it and it'll take time. Let's look at one that already exists. So I'm going to go ahead and that's the new one that we just created. I'm going to use our CIS assessment for the demo today. When you open up an assessment, you will see all of the similar details that you just provided in terms of the parameters. You will see the total evidence being collected you will see the accounts in scope and the services in scope, the owners who have access, etc. And then you will see a summary of all the controls. Now, these controls are grouped by control sets, which is coming from the original definition of how the authority that set up the compliance type has defined the grouping of controls. PCI have their own definition, HIPAA have their own definition. We basically provide you a view of the exact information that we are getting from the original authority that publishes and is the authority to define that compliance type. So this is coming from CIS. Now within each control set, there are multiple controls, and you can take a look at the specific control. You can see the total evidence being collected. You can see if anything has been added to an assessment report. We'll talk about that in another moment. Let me look at this control type. So this control asks that I should maintain an inventory of sensitive information. On this page, I can see the name of the control. I can see the description, what is expected from this control. And then I see testing information, which tells you how AWS is meeting this control and what is the data that we are collecting. I can see much more specific detail by going to the Data Sources tab. The Data Sources tab lists out the exact data sources and the exact API call or whatever we are making to fetch it, as well as the frequency at which the data is being fetched. That frequency can be changed for API calls, and API calls can be kicked off daily, weekly, or monthly. So some of these parameters are customizable. Now let's take a quick look at what the evidence looks like. Evidence is getting organized into folders. And if there are any compliance checks that are being flagged by Security Hub or Config, they are being listed out here. So let's take a quick look at one of the evidence folders to see what's in it. Over here in the evidence folder, you will see a summary at the top, which tells you how much evidence has been collected on that particular date. And then you will see the actual evidence data points with a timestamp, as well as the type of the evidence. So for example, in this case, we have configuration data, which is being collected through an API call regarding your security groups or your route tables. So these are API calls. If I take a quick look at what this data looks like, I can view the JSON, which is the response. And by the way, this is formatted when put into an assessment report for much easier reading by a business persona. But the actual raw data that Audit Manager is fetching is in the JSON format. And in some cases, customers might want to parse that JSON themselves or might want to use it differently. So just wanted to show you what that looks like. Let's go back and take a look at another piece of evidence as an example. So let's take a quick look at a piece of evidence, a compliance check coming from AWS Config. Again, here you will see attributes of the evidence where it is collecting the AWS account, the IAM ID. You also see the config rule name against which this compliance check has been generated. So as you may be aware, AWS Config is a service that allows you to set up rules around compliance in the organization. And if those rules are not coming out to be passed, then that's where you will see a message which says that we got a non-compliant status against that config rule. And that's what this evidence is. So it gives you a little flavor for the type of evidence that Audit Manager collects. Let's go back and take a quick look at what do you do with that evidence. So let's go back to this framework. We know we collected a bunch of evidence. Now let's add some evidence to an assessment report and take a look at what an assessment report looks like. Actually, I'll go back to the same one we just collected and add them. So let me go ahead and select a couple of pieces of evidence to add to an assessment report. Here you go. An API call. Let me add that. All right, so you've added that to an assessment report. Now let's go and generate an assessment report so that we can see what that looks like. You have items selected in the assessment report. Go ahead and generate it is the next step. Pretty easy. Again, a fairly clear click-through method. You put in some description, and then you just press a button. It goes in the S3 bucket that you had selected for this particular framework when you were setting it up. It'll take a little time to generate. So let me go ahead and, again, for the purpose of the demo, show you an existing assessment report. So here we are. This is being generated. Let me go ahead and show you an assessment report that I had produced earlier. This report will be available for download as a zip file containing a PDF summary of the assessment report, and any of the evidence that you added into it will also be added in as PDF standalone files. So let me show you what that looks like. Here is the folder in which I have that assessment report. If I take a quick look at what the assessment report looks like, here we go. It's a demo report, information on when it was generated, and then it gives you a summary of the framework from which this assessment report was generated, as well as all of the other relevant information, the services in scope, the accounts in scope. So at no point do you have to go back and refer to anything. The assessment report has the information that is complete and standalone, and it's ready to be shared with an internal auditor or even an external auditor, depending on your context. It gives you a table of content listing out the controls for which evidence will be included in the assessment report. And it provides you links to go directly to the evidence file. So let me show you what that evidence will actually look like. Let's go ahead. We have evidence from 1 day in this assessment report as well. Let's take a quick look. So in this particular case, you have details of an evidence. Again, fairly standalone. It gives you all the relevant information that you need to be able to interpret this evidence in context. And then you will be able to see a formatted output. So earlier I showed you what the JSON looked like. And the JSON it reads a little bit like code. It's meant to be used by the IT person who's looking to collect the data and potentially looking to parse it or anything like that. When you're ready to be sharing this information with an auditor, we try to organize this information in a more readable format and provide more context on the parameters. So for example, what's a subnet ID? This is a very short definition based on the definition of that AWS API call, which is being utilized to pull this data. So that gives you a really quick flavor for what evidence might look like. Let's go back again to our Audit Manager service, and let me quickly show you what setting up custom controls might look like. So Audit Manager has a framework library. This has all of the standard frameworks. As we saw when we started to create this assessment, we provide this library, which has a set of frameworks derived from the original authority documents, and several of these are licensed, for example, from PCI or CIS, etc. You can also create your own custom frameworks. So you can create a custom framework here where you can select controls from the control library, or you can add your own custom controls. Let's go to the control library. Control library has a listing of all of the controls across all assessments that are available in Audit Manager. you can select any of these controls and you can customize it. Or you can create your own custom control. Let's take a quick look at customizing an existing control. What does that look like? Let's say I want to customize this one. Again, I go through a pretty simple click-through process where I get to put in my descriptions and select my parameters, like my tags. In this particular case, I'll just move on. And then I get to select my data sources. Do I want to have automated evidence, or do I want this control to be a manual control? Right now, since I'm customizing an existing control, I have some pre-selected options being presented to me here. The compliance check from Security Hub is being fetched against this control today, and I know exactly which Security Hub control compliance check is being fetched. But I could go and select a different data source here. I could say that I want to be able to select a CloudTrail data source and select a CloudTrail event name instead. So depending on what type of evidence I want to select, or what type of data source I want to select, I can do that from here as I'm customizing my control. And basically, it's the same workflow in creating a custom control. You define the parameters, you define the name, the purpose, the testing information, and then you go ahead and select your data sources. We quickly touched upon custom frameworks. I do want to share one more information about that. So in the framework library, you have your standard frameworks, you have your custom frameworks. You also have an option to share requests or share frameworks. So it is possible to share framework between accounts, and that is often extremely helpful as you are trying to set up Audit Manager and use Audit Manager, say with a company that's working for you under a contractor, an offshore contractor, or if you have a situation that is an M&A situation, or if you have a situation where there is slight difference between how departments operate a certain compliance or a governance guidance, but you don't want to reinvent the wheel and you want to start from an existing template. This feature is also very useful for partners, of course, your consulting partners who might want to provide you guidance on how to run a particular evidence collection process or assessment, and they can help set up frameworks for you and share it into your account. So that's essentially a really, really quick, very high-level overview of the Audit Manager service. Again, coming back to the dashboard, it should make a lot more sense when you see this now, that the dashboard provides a great place to do a quick overview of what's happening in your account across multiple assessments you might be running. And it allows you to quickly dive into where issues are getting flagged. It allows you to quickly dive into specific assessments where you might want to explore more specific data and action. So that's all, and back to Shar. Thank you.